right, praise Yah and welcome everybody. Good evening. Tonight, the question is, what is a martyr? By definition, the word martyr is one who bears witness to the testimony of Yahusha and his Father's kingdom. A life that's been exhausted while leading a political religious movement does not automatically meet this standard. Albeit Charlie was a gifted organizer and communicator, he was also a public political actor whose ministry arm explicitly fused with American civic activism. This matters when it comes to declaring martyrdom. I want you to know first and foremost that I'm not here to prove who Charlie was. I didn't know him. I could not be a witness to his fruit. No conspiracy, no embellishment of facts. Only what is evident. I also want to encourage those of you who truly are called as Yahweh's assembly to remain focused on the kingdom of Yahuwah. Remain set apart from this age. It's important. As Yahusha said in Luke chapter 17:23, people will tell you, look, there he is, or look, he's here, or there. Do not go out or chase after them. In this hour, there are many things that are being presented to us as truth and reality. And so it's imperative that we keep our lamps burning. That's how we endure the dark night. Satan's time is short. He's limited in power. He is cunning and deceptive. And we know that in this age, he will use both emotion and technology to try to garner power that comes from the will of man. Now, we know that Satan's time is short. And as a result, he will utilize resources to try to garner power that comes from the will of man. He needs the consent of the people to remain enthroned in this world. And if you haven't noticed, patriotism seems to be fading. It's dying, and it has been for quite some time, which is a sure sign that Hasatan's influence is also waxing. So what is this revival? Biblically speaking, revival means to fill the belly with bread, with sustenance, life. Filled with sustenance means with power and efficacy, and that is a threat to the kingdom of darkness. Well, there's a massive call right now to revival, but again, I assure you there's no word in the Bible that talks about a revival to bring people into the church to fill the churches. It assumes that the person who needs sustenance, if they are famished. That makes more sense to me when it comes to revival. It means to have sustenance. So why would the enemy participate in this type of debauchery? Well, I believe that it's an attempt by Satan or the powers of darkness or the agents of darkness to retain, to take back, or to hold on to the illegitimate power that they garnered from the will of man through consent. This is called ultra vires in agency law. Ultra vires means power outside of the source. This is also transfer of agency, where the agent then transfers something over to a third party. It's illegitimately acquired. It's usually done by embezzlement or theft. We know that the serpent is that third party that man transferred agency to. So in agency law, it's called conversion. And that conversion is when an agent wrongfully disposes of, transfers, or uses the principal's property as if it were their own, misappropriating it to an unauthorized agent. And again, in this case, it would be the serpent. So let's talk about Charlie Kirk. Well, first and foremost, he blended religion and politics by design. Turning Point USA states in their tenets of faith that it exists. This institution exists to resource churches to stand for truth, liberty, and the kingdom, and to be salt and light in every aspect of life, including the public square. Now, this language is explicitly aimed at civic engagement and cultural change. In their own words, they connect faith to political liberty and national revival. You can find that at TPUSA. Now, we'll get into some of the facts surrounding his organization. The first thing is that his organizations are political and nonprofit vehicles. They are not a church or an assembly or a kahal. Turning Point USA is in fact a 501c3 that identifies, educates, trains, and organizes students to promote the principles of fiscal responsibility, free markets, and limited government. Turning Point Action is the 501c4 campaign that's used for overt political activity. It's a campaign arm. Now, these are lawful civic entities whose purpose is political mobilization. Now, the kingdom language used in TPUSA aligns with Protestant, evangelical, reform, activism, not with a distinct a political assembly appointed by Yahweh through the agency of Yahusha. It's more of an Athenian ecclesia. TPUSA's call for a God-breathed transformation and revival of American life uses classic revival reform vocabulary that is historically Protestant, evangelical, political theology in America, where religion is harnessed to renew the nation and its constitutional order. Whether you applaud or oppose this tradition, it is a reformist blending of church language with national politics. This is not a true representation of the covenant governance of Yahweh's assembly, also known in Hebrew as the Kahal. Claims underscore syncretic breath, not single-minded covenant loyalty. Candace Owens alleging that he had begun praying the rosary and attending mass, that they do reflect a broad ecumenical religious posture inside a political project rather than a narrowly defined Torah covenant witness. Now, if you don't know this about Candace Owens, she is also a professed Catholic, and she called herself a Mason for TPUSA. Gotta consider those things. What happened recently was politically motivated. His organizations were tied in primarily to the imperium of Rome, the political systems of this world. Two claims out there. The first one was that he was a martyr for the kingdom of Yahweh, and that was substantiated by the fact that Charlie has most recently started keeping the Sabbath. And so it fueled controversy and division amongst the community. Now, people were somewhat divided and desperate for an opportunity to mobilize or to engage in something that is purposeful. However, I want to encourage you, Yah is doing something amongst his remnant, amongst his people. And I believe that this is why the enemy is working overtime, and the agents of darkness are working overtime, just one thing after the other, just boom, 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 boom. And again, he's garnering for your response, your clicks, your engagement. If we take an example of Yahusha's playbook, we see that Yahusha was very limited in his interaction with people, and even those who questioned him, he was very specific about how he responded. So he was careful with how he represented the kingdom. He was careful about those whom he chose to engage with. And social media is there to encourage your emotional response. It's about your response, your engagement. It's something we need to protect. It seems as though the assembly is somewhat complacent, that we lack some sort of efficacy or power, but Yahweh is not without power. He is the only one that can harness unlimited power. Although we seem limited currently, I assure you that Yahweh is doing something, and the enemy he may not understand all the details of what Yahweh is doing, but he knows that what Yahweh is doing in the assembly affects the amount of time that he has. So again, those 2 points that were made, one, that he was a martyr for the kingdom of Yahweh, and two, this claim was substantiated by him keeping the Sabbath. To some, Sabbath keeping is a mark of true faith, but I want you to know that there are many diverse groups out there in the world that keep some form of Sabbath, including Judaism, Samaritanism, multiple Sabbatarian churches or denominations, such as Seventh-day Adventists, Seventh-day Baptists, several churches of what is known as the God bodies, Messianic and Hebrew roots community, Beta Israel, elements of Ethiopian Orthodoxy, along with movements like Rastafari. So it's not exclusive. Even Islam keeps a Sabbath regardless of the day. And so for that reason, we cannot say that simply because somebody keeps the Sabbath, that this is an indication of legitimate faith, or that this is an indication that they belong to Yahweh. Okay, Sabbath observance alone does not certify allegiance to Yahweh's covenant or the testimony of Yahusha. Now, I want to conclude by saying that witches, specifically under Wicca, so simply because someone claims to keep the Sabbath does not mean that they have the substance of the Sabbath, which is that rest that is provided by Yahusha, resting in him. All right, so now we'll talk about the history, a brief history of Protestant Reformation and its alignment with political power. And the reason I'm bringing this information up is because, again, Charlie was active in civic political affairs. The Protestant Reformation was not just theological. It was deeply political. Reformers like Luther, Calvin, and later Puritans believed that nations should be reordered around their interpretation of the gospel. This is what is known as the kingdom. So this kingdom language that is mentioned in Turning Point USA, again, he doesn't define exactly what this kingdom is. He just simply says the kingdom is one of his 3 tenets. But this kingdom language would eventually become shorthand for creating godly society through civil reform. The motive was to shape law, education, and politics to reflect biblical principles. Luther argued for Christian princes to reform the church within their territories. Calvin established a civic religious order in Geneva. Puritans carried this into England and America, seeking a city on a hill. That is a political society. But we have to remember that at that time, placing or removing themselves from Israel and all that that entailed. And in the process, replacing Israel as the assembly under political power, under the imperium or the Athenian laws of men. This is vital because anything that has to do with politics or civil reformation is without power. It is within the realm of darkness. It is Satan's domain. So TPUSA's use of kingdom rhetoric taps right into the same heritage, fusing spiritual identity with the reform of civil institutions. So let's talk about civil reform. Now, before the Reformation, civil order in Europe was tied directly to church catechism. Monarchs ruled by what was known as the divine right, and we've talked about that many times here. And canon law infused civil courts. Post-Reformation, after the Reformed Protestant catechisms, such as Luther's, Calvin's, Westminster's, still tied moral order to the church. However, as Enlightenment and Freemasonry spread, reformers began to argue that societies should be founded on natural law and reason. The result? Well, it was civil reform. And after the 18th century, this shifted from catechism-based governance to rational principles, rights, liberty, and equality. And you're going to see these 3 foundational tenets throughout their language. And again, if we go back and we look at Charlie's tenets of faith, and you'll see this word liberty in all of them, but what is it that they are claiming liberty from? So Charlie's is truth, liberty, and the kingdom. And again, that is Protestant language, okay, Reformation language. And here in the post-Reformation, they wanted to base their governance on rational principles such as rights, liberty, and equality. Again, very similar to Charlie's tenets, truth, liberty, and the kingdom. Now, canonical law and catechism were the backbone of European legal culture. But it's important to note when I say canon law, it was a translation that was created specifically for those in seats of power. They did not employ the authentic scriptures. In other words, they did not refer to the Torah, the law, or the jurisprudence of Yahweh's covenant and or his government, those agents that he had designated, also known as the tribes of Israel or even Judah. So even though they may have employed canonical law to the catechism, which is basically part of the Catholic tenets of faith, which empowers them to govern, even though this may be the backbone, it was a translation, and that translation fit their narrative. Okay, so once this began to take place, they began to equate sin and crime. They became synonymous with one another and overlapped each other. And this is how the state was mandated to execute. And then later we'll see a division between church and state, but this is how they began to execute their authority. And it was again by taking the word of Yahweh, a distorted view, a distorted translation of the word of Yahweh, replacing Israel with the Catholic or the Catholic Church and or the papacy of Rome, and then replacing Rome as the agent. So in the early modern period, Protestant nations still shaped law through biblical categories such as oaths, Sabbath laws, moral codes. However, due to the Masonic Enlightenment influence, the U.S. Constitution was drafted without the catechism. And the reason why the serpent or Satan requires a man to govern is because of the law of agency. It goes back to that transferring by will. If you haven't studied agency law, it's important that you do. I encourage you to do that. The language of agency. And so as man transferred his will over to the serpent becomes principal, but only in death. And I don't really want to get into a teaching on that, but it's important again to note why certain parties, certain movements would strive to separate. And it was all part of the plan, right? So to initially incorporate the word of Yah, but then to separate it. So how does this tie into Charlie's position? So we just looked at the Reformation in brief, and then post-Reformation, and then the result, again, leading to civil reform and the tenets of rights, liberty, and equality, and then creating the natural law of man and reason. Instead, what they aimed to do was to elevate secular human rights, also rational procedure and contract theory. So again, we see those three things: human rights, rational procedure, and contract theory. And the result, well, it was a foundational shift from the church catechism. And remember that Rome ruled, right? So the church catechism as binding authority to reason and consent of the governed. So it's exactly what I'm talking about in regard to a transfer of agency. Again, it's embezzlement, it's theft, because life does not belong to us. It was a gift by Yahweh, and Yahweh remains the principal and we the agent, right? So it was ultra vires. We had no power or authority. We had no authority to give something that did not belong to us away in the first place. This is why it's theft. All right. So before the 18th century, education in Europe was almost entirely catechetical. Children learned to read specifically so that they could memorize catechism. After the Reformed period, Protestant reformers initially expanded literacy so everyone could know the Bible. Again, their translation of the Bible. Masonically influenced reformers, however, like Horace Mann, rejected catechism as sectarian and divisive. And during the 19th century, they worked to build public common schools with moral but non-sectarian instruction. Instead, they focused on civic duty, patriotism, and ethics without specific church dogma. In this way, education was wrested away from catechism and placed in the hands of the state, with secular civic catechism replacing religious catechism. That's important. What they ended up doing, this was a shift that took place. And as a result, they were able to remove that binding authority to reason and consent, to remove it from the papacy and to put it into the hand of civic catechism. It's all part of the, shifting shadows. So Roman catechism originally shaped people for covenant life under the order of the Pope, binding society under his authority as Christ's vicar. The Protestant Reformation began as a revolt against this centralized power, seeking to devolve authority from the Pope to local governments and magistrates. Yet this transfer did not end with rulers. And over time, it opened the door for sovereignty to be claimed by the people themselves. And that's what Satan needs. He needs people to assume their own freedom and or their own liberty, their own agency as principle, so that in death, they can, by their will, their volition, give consent. In their eyes, these powers and principalities become legitimate rulers. So what began as a theological protest became the seedbed of modern political theory, where church catechism gave way to civic catechism, and obedience to Yahweh's covenant was eclipsed by loyalty to the state. Alongside the Protestant Reformation came the Enlightenment and Freemasonry, both arising to shift the foundation of society from the jurisprudence of Yahweh to the jurisprudence of man. What once stood on, "Thus saith Yahweh," was recast as "we the people." Revelation gave way to reason, or revolution, covenant to contract, and divine authority to popular sovereignty. So you see, juxtaposing, if you just do the research, you'll find that there seems to be three basic tenets and they're counterfeit. So what was established then by these movements and foundational shifts was, instead of revelation, people would receive reason. Instead of covenant, they would be bound by contract. Instead of divine authority and power, it would be given to popular sovereignty. So in this way, the catechism of the church was supplanted not by spirit and truth, by the Ruach of Yahweh and truth, but by the civic catechism of human self-rule. Now, alongside the Protestant movement, the Enlightenment and Freemasonry rose as parallel forces. Both rejected the supremacy of divine revelation in law and governance. Instead, they elevated human reason, natural philosophy, and the idea of universal brotherhood, fraternity. So let's talk a little bit about Enlightenment thinkers like Locke and Rousseau and Voltaire. All of them argued that legitimacy came from the consent of rational individuals, not from Yahweh's covenant or Yahusha's authority, or even by election as the Ruach testifies or gives witness of that person. Instead, Masonry provided a particular network for embedding these ideas into civil society. Lodges taught a symbolic catechism of their own. Their three tenets were light, liberty, and equality. Again, for some reason, they just like their threes. Now, in Charlie's foundation of belief, we see again, truth, liberty, and kingdom. So I ask you tonight, whose truth and which kingdom? Is it the kingdom of Yahweh as in spirit and truth, or a political civic kingdom, e.g., nation under biblical values? That's key. Remember, the serpent is subtle, twisting of words just a little bit to redirect a person's attention or belief or perception. So was Charlie promoting a nation under biblical values or biblical values under a nation? His claim suggests a blending of the two, designed to replace biblical covenant with rational fraternity under God. Just that word alone can refer to any power. Now, these collaborations did more than reshape politics or education. They subverted the very concept of law itself, replacing divine covenant with human dominion. The biblical model of true jurisprudence founded on Yahweh's covenant commands, thus saith Yahweh, became increasingly obscured as each movement advanced. With every stage, the veneer of divine authority was preserved, but the substance was hollowed out. And that's what I said earlier. Biblically speaking, to revive someone is to assume they are famished and then to give them sustenance or substance, to fill them, and bread being a symbol of life, right? Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word. It is the word of Yahweh revealed to the man, both in authority and in power. This is the kingdom displayed not just in word, but in power. His word has power. Transformative, not reform, but transformative power. We're not here to reform Satan's kingdom. We're not here to make it great again. Removing, thus saith Yahweh, obscuring those things, these movements would then advance in their political agenda, keeping the veneer of divine authority or appointment, but removing the substance of the Ruach. So what we see in lieu of Yahweh's jurisprudence is the Enlightenment Masonic model, somewhat encapsulated by the Roman imperium. So we see law as social contract instead of covenant contract, right? We see these concepts of covenant being removed, and then we see contract then replacing the covenantal language of Yahweh. It goes from the assembly or the unified monarchy of Yah to we the people. That's a claim that they are making. We the people. It's about power and dominion. Again, in order to give that to these agents of darkness. Agents of darkness, they're called that for a reason. So here's where authority is constructed upward from man rather than revealed downward from Elohim. And we see this even with Baphomet, right? With as above, so below. This is a reference, a symbolic reference, no doubt, but a reference to the aligning of those two powers. It's the dominion that Satan wants. He wants to retain his seat or his throne, and he is scurrying or striving to find a way in which he can maintain it forever. The irony is that he will get what he has desired. Yahweh will give it to him. Unfortunately, his eternity is not what he had planned in his mind. This is more than reform. This was a juridical revolution, shifting the foundation of law from covenant to human self-rule. Now we're going to shift to modern times. So today's systems still carry traces of catechism, oaths on Bibles, moral language, civic rituals, but in reality, actual foundation is antinomios. And in Greek, anti means against, and nomos means law. It literally means against the law or lawless. In biblical and legal Greek, this usually refers to the Torah or the jurisprudence of Yahweh's kingdom, one who is opposed to the law of Yahweh. And we can see clearly just by the information that I shared with you now that these systems transferred authority to the papacy and then took that authority from the papacy and made a claim that we, the people, now hold in our possession the power of self-governance. This is when the agent becomes the principal. However, this act is ultra vires. That means that it's outside of the power to perform. It has no power to truly perform. So by their very nature, these systems, all of them, any government, political system, rejects the jurisprudence of Yahweh, his laws, his ordinances, his customs, his rule, and replace his kingdom reign with man's rule here on earth. To call someone or something antinomios is to identify them as rejecting divine jurisprudence in favor of autonomy. We, the people, again, a proclamation that is essentially antinomian jurisprudence, self-rule against being ruled by the Ruach and truth. So what's the conclusion here? Civil reform, modern laws, and public education were not founded on the jurisprudence of Yahweh's kingdom or covenant, which is why they will never give glory to Yahweh. No matter how many revivals or reformation movements take place, these systems, modern laws, public education, they were not founded on the jurisprudence of Yahweh's kingdom. They do not incorporate his covenant, his laws, his ways, his ordinances, his statutes. They are antinomios. They are lawless, truly. All of these systems instead were founded by breaking from it, liberty, being set free from the governance of the principle. It's the story from the beginning in Genesis. And although the Protestant movement acted as the catalyst, Freemasonry and Enlightenment replaced it with reason, rights, and civic loyalty. What remains is a secular catechism of the state, not a biblical one. Let's talk about evangelical Protestants in America, which again is what Charlie was affiliated with, or at least by his own confession, aligned himself with. Now, during what was known as the Great Awakenings, evangelical Protestants in America framed Reformed movements as, guess what? Kingdom work. Abolition, temperance, and education reform were all cast as extensions of advancing the kingdom of God on earth. The evangelical mindset often viewed America itself as an instrument of divine destiny. Now, Turning Point USA borrows from this script, recasting civic activism in schools, boards, elections, laws as participation in God's kingdom agenda. It is a continuation of evangelical reform impulse using public square engagement as a measure of spiritual faithfulness. I'm hoping that you really heard that. Being salt and light in these forums, they say this is our fruit. To reform civil laws or civic laws and education and all of these things, there's nothing new under the sun. And using a public square to engage such changes or reforms, well, this is how you measure our spiritual faithfulness. This is them. It's not by demonstrating the fruits of transformation, which are born by the Spirit. How cunning the serpent can be in his rhetoric, his speech, and his use of words to twist and malign the truth. So here's where the danger lies. In Yahusha's teaching, he says that the kingdom of Yahweh is not of this world, John 18:36. But Protestant evangelical reform movements historically blurred that line by calling political activism kingdom work. TPUSA is no different. They reinforce the Protestant assumption that faithfulness requires reforming worldly systems. It's less about spiritual ambassadorship in power and truth and more about legitimizing political struggle with religious language. That's why you see kingdom in their messaging. It's signaling continuity with Reformation era rhetoric where religion was harnessed to justify political resistance and reform. The biblical kingdom, the true kingdom of Yah, is covenantal, beloved. It's ruach-led. It's separate from worldly politics. And Yahweh said, let there be light, and there was light. And Yahweh saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness, Genesis 1:4. Yahusha refused the offer of reformation under Rome. instead announcing a kingdom that comes through transformation of hearts, an inward, intraviris, an inward transformation, that there was a power working in the true believer, the legitimate son or the legitimate daughter, to transform, and that power working in them is a power greater than the powers of this world. We demonstrate the kingdom in a power and authority, beloved. It is bearing the fruit of righteousness. It's not about going into the political arena to profess a archetypical kingdom or a shadow kingdom that gives the illusion or the appearance of Yah's kingdom simply because the language is what defines it, because you're good at articulating or creating a narrative based off of prose or words, and therefore in the minds of men entertain the idea that what I'm talking about is the same kingdom. We see this same sort of argument amongst Islam or Islamists. They will claim that their Allah is the same because of Abraham, because of Ishmael. However, again, if you study the law of agency, you will find that the act that was committed with Hagar was an ultra vires, vires. It was not ratified by Yahweh. And he says, I hear you. However, I will bless the lad. I will bless him, and I will give him a portion. But as far as the inheritance or the promise, it remains with Sarah. And so they are claiming that they are legitimate sons of Abraham. However, Ishmael was sent out, and he did not continue his legacy under his father's name. He had no patronymic. He did not carry the name of Abraham. And so there's no difference here. Taking a narrative and twisting it so that it is in favor of the one who presents it. But I remind you, the biblical kingdom, the kingdom of Yahweh, we won't even say biblical, we'll just say the kingdom of Yahweh is founded on covenant relationship. The power of the kingdom is the spirit of his word. It's the ruach, and the word that comes to life by revelation and transformation. It's not conformation. It's not conforming to the ways of this world or reforming the ways of this world, but it's a transformation process that takes place inward and is expressed outwardly by the fruit you bear. So what we see in the political arena, where we mix or where they blend the biblical narrative of being an agent under the hegemony of Yahweh and all the things, they use all the right words, and then they blend that with the powers of the world, powers of the earth, right? And they are saying that it's Yah's work or God's work that they are doing. So what we see instead is, as even Yahusha resisted the Reformation under Rome, in what was he establishing? He said the kingdom of Yahweh is within. And those who enter into the kingdom must be what? Born again. Not born of this world, but dead to it. We have come out of this world with all of its lawlessness. We come out of the world, and there's a transformation that takes place, which is also the idiomatic expression, born again. That means that we become children of a different kingdom, that we receive the name of a legitimate son, and we ourselves then become legitimate once again. However, the reformers and now groups like TPUSA redirect this into political strategy, making civic activism for kingdom legitimacy. Bottom line here, we have a responsibility to uphold the truth with integrity, not to participate in the discourse of this world as it is founded on division and lies and confusion and conspiracy. We should have no part in it, but uphold the truth. If you want to honor the truth, speak plainly. Charlie was a prominent American political activist who consciously merged religion and conservative politics through a network of 501c organizations and a church engagement arm that champions political liberty and national revival. That is not the same thing as suffering unto death for the testimony of Yahusha and the government of Yahweh. Calling him a martyr of Yahweh's kingdom confuses categories that scripture keeps distinct. But let me tell you exactly how Romans chapter 10 verse 9 reads in proper context. It says, if you confess the master Yahusha with your mouth and believe in your heart that Yahuwah raised him from the dead, then you shall be saved. It goes on. And what confession are we to make with our mouths? Chapter 10, verse 13 says, for whoever calls upon the name, so whoever calls upon the power of his name shall be saved. Now, the word confess there in Romans chapter 10, verse 9 is homologio, meaning to consent. That is by agency, to give it back, to consent. Remember, I told you that Satan needs our consent, which is why anyone who does not belong to Yahusha, who belongs to Yahuwah, cannot give this consent to him. They must maintain their fealty, and their will has already been contracted or given to by consent another. So that's why a person who is not truly of Yahuwah cannot give true consent. Attorneys use legal language all the time to manipulate and to create a narrative that is in favor of their defendant, right? Whoever it is that they are representing. It's typical. This is important. So this means to give consent, that is to, not my will, but your will, give your will to another. That's the transfer that takes place. The act that was implicit act in the garden, where the man gave him, said, the woman made me do it. And then the woman said, the serpent deceived me. And so by deception, Satan has received this ultra vires, this authority to govern mankind, and specifically through seduction, the woman, and deception, right? So to take back agency and then to appropriate it, or to put it back in the hands of the true principle, the one who gives life, the gift is life, is the true confession of our faith. It's about a transfer of agency, coming out from under the agency of darkness, an illegitimate power who stole, and then taking it back and giving it to the rightful master or the rightful heir, the one who through salvation gives us life again. So this act of salvation comes to those who call upon his name. Why is this important? Because in 1 John chapter 4, verses 2 through 3, it says, by this you shall know the spirit of Elohim. Every spirit that confesses that Yahusha Hamashiach, Yahusha, has come in the flesh, not God, okay? Yahusha was the legate, the delegate, the one who received delegated authority from heaven, okay, to delegate Yahuwah's will, the principle on earth. He is the legate, the one who was sent to represent the Father. So it says here, every spirit that confesses that Yahusha has come in the flesh is from Elohim. And every spirit that does not confess Yahusha is not from Elohim. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard was coming and now is in the world already. 2 John 1:7. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Yahusha HaMashiach in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Charlie's legacy is being framed by some as martyrdom for the kingdom of Yahuwah, yet here, the evidence shows something different. His organizations, Turning Point USA, and its affiliates are political and nonprofit engines. Their language of truth, liberty, and the kingdom fits squarely within the Protestant evangelical reform tradition, which historically fused revivalist faith with national revival, but did not embody the spirit-led kingdom that Yahusha declared is not of this world. Charlie, from what I have gathered, his public witness centered on applying biblical rhetoric to reform civic life, aligning more with Enlightenment and Protestant political theology than with the covenantal ambassadorship of Yahuwah's kingdom. What took place recently was the result of a political ploy, a tragedy on many levels, but not evidence of who Charlie was as a man or believer. To confuse political martyrdom with biblical martyrdom is to blur categories Scripture keeps distinct. The kingdom of Yahuwah is ruach-led, set apartness, covenantal, and eternal. The kingdoms of men rise and fall, but only those who overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony are called true martyrs in Revelation 12:11. Beloved, again, I want you to take this information, do your diligence, research it for yourself, weigh out the evidence, and then I implore you, stop giving consent to the powers of confusion, because again, that's how the enemy retains control over the will of man. It is not so much technology or deceptive dogmas or, liars and thieves and the things in the world, the sin in this world, but it's through confusion and veils of deception, by which we engage with such things. When we engage and participate in the conspiracies of this world, we are giving legitimacy to something that does not have it, but it's in the eyes of the constituent, in the eyes of the person. Remember, her eyes were open and she did see. So what was unveiled? Well, the natural realm where death persists. In this realm, in this world, it is a kingdom of darkness where death is currently being disposed of. Praise Yah. But in the kingdom of light, there is no darkness, there is no sin, and there is no darkness and no need for reform. It is our obligation as stewards, fiduciary duty, as stewards and agents of the salvation working in us because of Yahusha and his work. That call then is to enter into the fullness of the kingdom, to enter into life, not to participate with the things of this world. And that doesn't just include sin, right? It's not just about refraining so that we can overthrow the nature of the flesh. And more importantly than ever, it includes the systems of government in this world that are antinomials, lawless. Lawless meaning there is no efficacy, there's no power or potency. Death has no sting. Sin is revocable. And if sin is revoked, then death loses its potency. It loses its power. This is truly how we demonstrate the kingdom, by overthrowing our flesh, not reforming it, but conquering it. The powers of this world would have us believe that it is our inherent right to engage in the affairs of this world. But yet we have been called to come out of her, not to go and reform the education systems that were Masonic in nature. I can assure you that nowhere in the scriptures does it mention collegiate forms or educational systems or higher learning in the kingdom of Yahweh. We're in this world, beloved, and the kingdom of Yahweh is within us. And although we're in this world, we are not of it. If anything you ever learn to master, let it be the fruit of self-control, and that includes silence. Learn to be silent and prudent and discerning when it comes to our engagement with people, places, or things. And no matter what we see out there, no matter what we see in social la-la land, no matter what we see, we have to remember that Satan is an illusionist. The technology that has been handed over to us that seems to be progressive, I assure you that this technology is not new. The elite and ruling elite have had access to this technology for millennia, for a very long time. However, there is a purpose, there's a reason why this technology has been made available to the mass public. It's a way to tether your interaction and engagement. It's a way for you to cast your ballots, to vote, to watch videos, and then to make a claim. Be careful, because every time you make a judgment or engage in argumentative rhetoric, it's a trap, it's a web. Powers of this world, they need that consent. They need your vote. They need you to have an opinion about the things that are going on in this world. Let the dead bury the dead. We are in the land of the living. We are seated in heavenly places. And I assure you, beloved, that the principal, Yahweh, the owner who has unlimited power, is perfecting and maturing his people. This heaven and this earth shall pass away, and so shall its age. And we look forward to a new heaven and a new earth with new Jerusalem, which will display the beauty of Yahweh's true jurisprudence, with Yahusha reigning from Zion, and the assembly, the Chahal, will govern under the apostolic commission to live and not die. The law of Yahuwah will be written upon her heart. She will no longer desire the bread of deception, and she will be a doer of the word of Yahweh, demonstrating for eternity the efficacy of Yah's word in spirit and in truth, beloved. So again, the call, let me remind you, come out of her. Come out of her. Remember that this was not an opportunity to discredit a man that's outside of the authority that Yahweh has given to me. I do not know the intent or the content of a man's heart. Yahweh does. And if Charlie truly is sanctified by the blood of Yahusha, truly written, his name written in the Lamb's book of life, then we rejoice, beloved. We rejoice, but by reputation, by their obedience and willingness to display Yah's glory, to yield as agents to the principal's will, to do his will. And so, beloved, if he truly is, then we rejoice because his life was not in vain. And as far as we are concerned, we will not taste death. Death is nothing. I want to say one more thing. I'm sure you know that not all that glitters is gold. And what do I mean by that? There are people, as we know, agents of Satan, right, who masquerade as ministers of light. There are people out there, especially in social media world, who are not legitimate. They use all the right words. They have all the right pictures posted. They have the t-shirts printed, Yahusha, the headbands. They glitter and they know the catchphrases. They know what's required to get people to assume that their identity is legit. And those people, I notice, are usually the ones who garner attention in times like this. And they add to the confusion. They're usually ones that are blasting what the people want to hear, clickbait. And then I see all this confusion, and I assure you that they are sorcerers, seducers, traducers, witches, agents of darkness, working to maintain the veil of confusion and division, to cause your emotion so that you are tethered to the flesh where there is no power. I get it. Technology is there, and just happened to be in that age. You have no idea how challenging it is, even for me, to not engage on social media, especially when I'm constantly seeing all the lies out there. People who have seats of power and great influence, who give glory to the Catholic Church. They've garnered the attention, the hearts and the minds of people, and people subscribe, giving agency, subscribing to. And all these people do is continuously ad nauseum feed empty imaginations. Nobody at this point knows anything is real or not real unless you were there, right? A true witness, not your account. That's how we should see things. But the majority of the stuff that's being posted out there in a court of law, with Yahweh being the supreme judge, this evidence would not stand. It would be thrown out. Your opinion does not determine the validity of Yah's word. Like, it just doesn't. Your opinion, although it matters to you, it should not be something that we give at every opportunity. Charlie and his organizations, being 501c3 and 501(4), are both arms and engines that blended civic affair with biblical narrative. Now I'm going to conclude with that. Stay away from all the conspiracies, the ring and the angle of the, whatever, and the color of his shirt, and stay away from it. Just keep scrolling. Pray over your mind. Pray over your eyes. Ask Yahuwah to give you discerning eyes. I want you to also know that I took the summer off. I took some time off. And for the last couple of years, I have been studying intently the laws of governance, as well as agency law and contract law and all forms of laws, especially ancient civilizations and ancient Near Eastern laws, and the development of these laws, Roman law, Athenian law. And I put a lot together, and when Yah wills it, I will be presenting on this, and I think it's pretty powerful. Again, I do believe it's going to strip Satan, which is again why I think he's moving as quickly as he is, because he knows, again, his time is short. He's going to be stripped and exposed. We do have a Bible study every other Thursday, and I do present this information there. We just talked about the legal proceedings of Matthew 18, as well as terms like jurisprudence or agency law or principle and things like that. Because what is the assembly? What is the body of Mashiach without power or without authority? Next Thursday, we are going to talk about the two branches of judicial authority and executive power. And we'll compare that with the Imperium of Rome, and we'll see the counterfeit. So if you're interested, go ahead and email me, and I will send you the credentials so that you can join us. Otherwise, you'll just have to wait and until I present that information here, all in Yah's Tommy. All right, bless you. Yah be with you. If you have any questions, you can message me or you can email me. Let me see if I can respond to some of these. Okay, Michael says, okay, his wife was a Catholic. Oh, she was. Okay, and then she transitioned. And do you know what she is now, Michael? Because I believe that both of them affirm by confession that they are evangelical. Is that not correct? And I've explained early on in this presentation exactly what Protestant evangelicalism is, and how it's still a branch that broke off from the papacy or the Roman catechism. I know I see that Michael's continuing to say that Charlie's wife is, she is Catholic. Got it. Okay, well, I would still need to see evidence of that. But yeah, let's look over here on YouTube. Karem says, when he sent his apostles out, he said, if a place doesn't receive you, not reform and convince them to let you in. I like that. So if they do not receive the testimony of salvation, which is to remit or retain a person's sins. It's about sin, right? But again, I don't want to give my opinion. My opinion does not matter when it comes to his salvation. But what if, this is just a what if, and we're just talking face to face here for a second, but what if he was exploited, right? What if his faith was pure and genuine, and whatever he had been taught, he just, sort of received that and then, regurgitated it and or mastered it in a way that he believed he was winning souls for the kingdom. Praise Yah. If that is the case, that seems to be the case with a lot of people. But what if he was exploited? What if he was manipulated and used, again, by the same agent, right, that exploits and, uses and exhausts the will of man, his life force? So it's the system that we are to expose, not the man, right? We don't judge the man, we judge the matter. So what if he was set up and now it's culminating where Christian revival is now taking a front row seat? And you think about it, it's very counterintuitive to what Yah's doing, as he has been quickening and waking people up to come out of the systems of governance, man's governance, right? The imperium, to come out of a false pseudo power that gives the illusion of freedom and liberty, we the people, when in reality, they are all slaves. And what if this quickening that Yah has been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years to bring us back under the hegemony of his jurisprudence, his laws, his ways, his government, his rule, not in the dead letter of the law, but in the spirit of the law. That's true reviving, right? To revive by his word, the law of liberty, the true law of liberty, having the power of his laws and his words written on our heart, transforming, recreating the creature. And Yahweh is restoring, bringing back not a national identity, but an identity of citizenship that has been obliged by heaven, testified by the Ruach. Our citizenship is in heaven. We are seated with Yahusha in heavenly places. And so what if in the midst of what Yahweh is doing to restore covenant relationship with his people, again, that is the work that Yahusha came to do, which was to restore covenant relationship and to give a proper identity so that we can receive back, so that we come back into that garden, that place of proper governance as the agent who has been entrusted. Possession does not equal ownership. Again, the law of agency. So just because Yahweh has entrusted mankind with breath and life and possessions, taking ownership as an agent, it's a breach of the steward's fiduciary duty. It's theft, misappropriation, embezzlement. It's a crime of treason, beloved, for the agent to act as the principal. Think about an attorney that you hire to give power of representation. Think about a lender or a real estate agent or an actor who has an agent. It's about representation and stewardship. Think about a banking agent or somebody who handles your money or property. That property, possession does not equal ownership. They do not own whatever you have entrusted to them. And they are bound under agency law to fiduciary duty to act and to maintain trust, that they are not going to take for themselves what does not belong to them and or redistribute it for their benefit, self-interest, because of covetousness. This is basically the summary of it all. We can see that the powers of this world are utilizing the opportunity to exploit people, their ignorance, and then to advance a political agenda. Always, right? Because patriotism has waxed cold. People are no longer patriotic. And we can see as a result of what just happened, people are pumped up again. Satan needs consent, beloved. And because the will of man is expiring, that means if his time is short, there's a designated time of expiration. Think of a star that falls from the heavens, okay? It has light while it's falling, but in the course of time, it takes specific amount of time for it to fall completely. and to become utterly dark, to lose its light. That's a very good analogy to try to describe Satan's fall. His agency is revocable. The principal has the right to revoke agency. And so his fall from grace or fall from glory means that his light is expiring. It's extinguishing little by little, which is why his time is short, which is why technology is now currently an idol. It's because he's hoping that mankind will be so tethered and so connected to it that they will be incapable of disconnecting and so addicted to commenting, engaging, subscribing, liking, participating, giving an opinion, arguing, all the things, giving agency. So I have a question here. Mike Allen says, stop talking. You're mocking a martyr. And see, this is exactly why I am speaking. You see that people are emotional. Mike is obviously emotional, led by his emotions, and a perfect example of why we need to use prudence and wisdom. We see as Mike becomes the evidence of what I am saying. Mike is more than likely somebody who is completely tethered to social media and finds his purpose in expressing his voice and his opinion without any evidence, without any, facts. Like, it's just his emotion and opinion. No critical thinking here. We should never say, hey, your words have convinced me of who you are. It's about action. And because none of us knew him personally, then we cannot testify to the true nature or intent of his heart. And that is not for us to be deciding in the first place. And this is why I guess I'm saying it's imperative for us to not have an opinion about these things. If you want to do research, if you want to honor the truth, then do that, right? Do the research, do the work. But to have an opinion about a man's salvation and or his position in this world, I think is a detriment to you. It's a trap. Present the facts, present the evidence. All I'm saying tonight is what his organization was founded off of or on, and what the tenets of his faith were that were pertinent to his testimony and that defined his faith in action. However, his action was to reform civic law, to reform government. And that's what the Reformation movement is. But you owe me no apology. If you were to look at the word apology, apologetics, it means to explain yourself in a court of law. I am not your court. I'm not your judge, Michael. So you don't owe anybody an explanation, or you don't owe anybody an apology. But I will say that yes, we have been invited to come out of her. And that means to come out of the systems of decay, to come out. And the best way that you can do that in a tangible way is to disconnect, right? You don't necessarily have to disconnect from social media, but your participation should be limited, and you should really begin to consider, Yahweh, is this for me to participate and to uphold the truth, to bring correction to somebody who may be deviating from the way. All right, so we're going to call it a night. Again, just presenting information for you to now go do diligence, be accountable, be responsible. I would say, you know what, just ignore, right? Resist the devil and he will flee. There's a lot of agents out there where the enemy he looks for the opportunity. He's lurking, lying in wait to see whom he may devour, right? A lot of people out there who seem to rise up every single time there's an event, especially a political one, where they have an opportunity to legitimize political powers, presidents, Netanyahu, Palestine, all the things. And so they come up and they try to get you to agree with them, to consent to their claim of legitimacy. These are valid terms in their world. These are legal terms in their world, terms that will bind them one day, that already have them bound, actually, but will convict them by their own words, by their own terms, by their own contracts. They are bound, and there will be a day of judgment and reckoning where they will be convicted. So that's why it's time for us to really become prudent and to consider our speech, who we engage with, who we allow to have access. It's one thing to be transparent. It's another thing to be vulnerable. Yahweh never called us to be vulnerable, but to be transparent. We have nothing to hide. Vulnerable is a weakness. It's to expose your weakness. And we are not called to be vulnerable in this world. We have a good shepherd. We have the Ruach, who is, the light covers us. So we remain embedded and abiding in the spirit. And this is enough. This is enough. We don't want to go out there in the world naked. We maintain our naked authority. Look that up. Look up naked authority in agency law compared to covered authority. and you'll see what I'm talking about. All right. Yah be with you, everybody. I enjoyed this night. And obviously, we continue to focus on the kingdom, advancing his kingdom by allowing it to rule and reign in us. We're not compulsive. We're not motivated by emotion. We're not persuaded by the ways of this world. We have the spirit of wisdom and understanding. We are anchored to truth. Okay. We are not tossed by the winds of doctrine. We don't have a double mind, for a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. We have a sound mind, the mind of Mashiach. Do your best to not form an opinion or to cast judgment, especially when it comes to the man. So yeah, with that being said, I'm going to call it a night. Yahuwah be with you. Bless you. Shalom.